Wonderful. I think we are live now.
We're live.
Welcome to our show, Mike.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, it's an honor to invite you to attend our group. And I think we are highly looking forward to learning everything about depreciation and how depreciation can help with property investment, and also interest to find out about your own property investment journey and whether there's anything that you feel helpful that you could share with our group member.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be happy to share whatever wisdom I've got underneath this very cheap haircut of mine. And I've put together some slides on some case studies, the basics of tax depreciation. We'll try and keep it sort of light and fun because it is a little bit of a dry topic. I've also got some insights into investor behaviour that come from our research that we put together that gets a lot of press in the media. So hopefully that's of interest as well.
Definitely. Excellent. Thank you so much. In that case, I'll let you take it away.
All right. So what I will do is I will share my screen. Let's just see. Pardon me. I'll just find the right one. Well, I'll just do my entire screen here. You can hopefully see behind the StreamYard curtain there. And yeah, just let me know if this if the slideshow is popping up there. You got that? Hopefully, yes. Hopefully, yeah, beautiful. Okay, beautiful. So tax depreciation and investor behavior, what you need to know, or at least what I think you need to know to be a successful property investor. So I'm sure there's different levels of expertise in the room, but just in case there's people here that haven't necessarily come across it or want to go back to the beginning, tax depreciation is essentially an allowance for the wear and tear of a property. So as a building basically just exists as an asset, it will wear out as long as it's being occupied, and even if it's not being occupied, right? So the ATO basically will give you depreciation, or it's a deduction on your taxable income because you have this investment property. So if you think about property investing a bit like a small business, the income is the rent, the expenses are things like the interest component on your mortgage, your property management expenses, repairs and maintenance. Tax depreciation is another expense, and that will essentially just lower your taxable income. So to get a tax depreciation schedule done, you do need a qualified quantity surveyor, and our expertise is estimating construction costs. But to work in the tax side as well, we need to be registered tax agents, because the Tax Practitioners Board and the ATO consider what we do is providing some tax advice. So I'm not an accountant. I can't do a tax return or a BAS statement, but we do have to be registered tax agents to do this depreciation. Now, I'll just try and hide this. Yeah, that's distracting me. All right, so how does depreciation actually work? What is the actual point of it? So if you're someone in Australia earning $100,000 a year, or you have a taxable income in Australia as a resident at $100,000 a year, you're paying just under $23,000 in tax. That's a pretty reasonable sum. Now, if we were to do a depreciation schedule and find $11,000 worth of depreciation deductions in a particular financial year, then in the eyes of the tax office, you're earning $89,000. And you can see on the slide, the difference is pretty significant in a tax saving. So it used to actually be a little bit higher than that, but the tax rates have come down a little bit. But as at the last completed financial year, you'd be looking at $19,392. So that's a tax saving of just over $3,500. And that's in that 1 year. A depreciation schedule will last for 40 years. Now, perhaps not every year is going to give you the same deductions, but in this scenario, that $11,000 gave you $3,500 back in your pocket. Now, a tax depreciation schedule normally costs about $600 or $700 and it's tax deductible. So you could say maybe $500 net. So is it worth paying $500 to get $3,500 back? The answer is absolutely. I'm not a mathematician, but that one makes sense, right? So when it comes to depreciation, there's really two main components of depreciation, or I like to say two buckets of depreciation. The first one is the plant and equipment items. Now, if you think about a house or a unit, perhaps where you are right now, if you look around, it's the items that can almost be fairly well described as easily removed without damage to the property. There are some exceptions to that, but what I'm talking about is things like blinds and curtains. I'm talking about vinyl and carpet, ovens, cooktops, range hoods, hot water systems, air conditioners, ceiling fans, those sorts of things. So the ATO gives us the effective life of those assets. So i.e., how long can it be placed in a property until it becomes to the point where it really needs to be replaced? So that tax legislation comes out every year. And to give you a bit of an idea, carpet has an 8-year effective life. So we use that 8-year effective life to work out what the depreciation rate. There's a little bit more mathematics in how we get to that, but I'll keep it light because it is the evening. I don't want people to go to sleep. But if you put $3,500 worth of carpet into a property, you'll get $875 to claim in the first in that first financial year. Now, on the 9th of May 2017, I was at home watching our then Treasurer deliver the budget speech. I clearly have a very limited social life, and that's just what I was up to that night. And what actually happened is that the rules changed. The Treasurer then was Scott Morrison. It was before he became Prime Minister. And he said, without any consultation to the quantity surveying or investor industries, that from that date onward, you would no longer be able to claim plant and equipment depreciation deductions unless you either bought a brand new property with brand new assets inside or you place brand new assets into the property. So in essence, if you buy a property that's only 6 months old, the carpets, blinds, the kitchen appliances, there'll be zero depreciation deductions available for them. So it's a pretty massive change. Now, on that night, I realised that I was the best placed person in Australia to model the impact of that change, because I knew on my desktop at work I had 5 sample sets of 1,000 property transactions. So I was able to look at, okay, what percentage of properties were purchased new, what were prior to that date, or what were the what sort of deductions would there be on the original building structure? And the net result is something that I'll share with you a little bit later, but it was nowhere near as bad as what we expected. Okay. But that's an important thing to understand about Division 40. So did you have a question there, Lillian? I can't actually see you.
Yes, I just wondering, I don't know, a lot of people confused, like, depreciation report. Do you get it from, can the accountant does it, or no, you have to look for a quantity surveyor like yourself?
Yeah, a good question. And please, at any time, if there's any questions or if you've got any questions, please interrupt me, because the way I've got my setup with a slight tech issue, I can't actually see any questions. But the answer is no. The big difference between us and accountants is that we're qualified to estimate construction costs. So if you buy an established property, there's nothing in that contract to say how much it costs to build as at the date that it was built. That's where the depreciation deductions sort of start from, or what the value of the carpet and the blinds and the kitchen appliances were. So what an accountant can do is they can write off individual components. So let's say you put $3,500 worth of carpet into an investment property. The accountant will be able to look up that it has an 8-year effective life. They'll be able to calculate under the diminishing value method that 200 divided by 8 is 25%. So they'll be able to figure out the depreciation rate, and they'll be able to write it off for you. So anytime you add something small, you'll have an item date and a cost. That's what they would need to depreciate it. Anytime the cost isn't known, that's where you would need a quantity surveyor. And even if you, say, build a brand new property for $350,000, you would say, okay, well, why do I need a quantity surveyor if I know that it costs $350,000 to build? So where the costs are known, we need to use them. So the total deduction we could never say is more than $350,000. But what we're able to do is we're able to come in and we're able to estimate the carpets, blinds, kitchen appliances, all those sorts of plant and equipment items. And they have a much higher rate of depreciation than the original building structure. And that's the next point here. The building structure, which is the other component of depreciation, it has a 2.5% rate of depreciation. So it's actually 10 times less than the depreciation rate for carpet. So whilst we can't depreciate more than the total cost, we can bring those deductions forward. So with tiles, for example, that's considered part of the structure, you have to wait 40 years to get all of those deductions back. With carpet compared to tiles, it's a lot faster. And the deductions are better to get upfront. Why? Well, you've got inflation, which is a real thing right now. It's pretty rampant. $1 today is going to be worth more than $1 tomorrow. And also, as an investor, the hardest time from a cash flow point of view to hold on to the property is going to be at the beginning, because over time you may pay down some of your principal. Even if you stay interest only, over time your rent will go up. So getting the deductions at the beginning is worth more to you as an investor than having to wait a longer time frame. Does that answer the question?
Yes, interesting. So am I getting this right from your earlier explanation? I feel like, if I done all this renovation, and I put in carpets and stuff like that, but I don't know, I don't have the receipt or something like that, don't worry about it. I can get you guys to estimate, what the cost is, and then just use that to claim, is it?
Yeah, so the tax office would say if cost information is available, then we need to use it. So if you know you spent $3,500 in carpet, you can't sort of just hide that fact and get us to hopefully estimate it higher. But if you do say to us, look, I renovated this property and I haven't kept the appropriate records, we can estimate it. You just want to be careful with the ATO, because it's sort of hard to prove that you didn't have the cost information if there's bank records of you paying certain amounts. But where that happens quite regularly is that people will buy a property with never having the intention of renting it out. In fact, we track that data. We find between 22 and 25% of investment properties started out as an owner-occupied property, which is a pretty big number. And those people that are doing those improvements, they're never thinking that they can claim those deductions back, because it's always their principal place of residence. So those people legitimately will say, over the years we've made some improvements, and that's where we might have to come in and estimate the value of those. So if they made some improvements over the years, the plant and equipment items they won't be able to claim deductions on, because when it gets to that tenant, it won't be a brand new asset, but the structural deductions they will be able to claim. And I'll outline, you can still see my slides there, Lily? Yes. Beautiful. So the other component of depreciation is the building structure. It's kind of the nailed down bits of the property. So if you think about a house, it's the concrete, it's the timber frame, it's the gyprock. It is things like tiling and cabinetry, those sorts of things. The roof, whether it's tile or iron, whether the property is clad or brick, those are all the hard structural components. So you actually get a 2.5% depreciation rate each financial year on the value of those works as at the date that they were built. So if it was built in 1990 and there's $100,000 worth of Division 43 or structural improvements that we work out, that's $2,500 a year worth of deductions from 1990 all the way to 2030. So the important thing to know, sorry?
Oh, no, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. The important thing to note is that there's a cutoff date for depreciation claims on the original building structure, and that's the date down the bottom on the 16th of September 1987. So the property needs to be built after that date to be able to get that 2.5% on the original building structure.
Okay.
If it's built in the 60s or 70s, the original structure won't qualify. There won't be plant and equipment items that you can deduct. But if the previous owner has made some improvements or some renovations, we're able to come in and estimate the value of those works, and you'll be able to claim on that. So that's an important thing to understand, is that it doesn't have to be brand new. It doesn't have to be built after 87. It could be built in the 1920s, but if it's had a $1 million renovation 6 months ago, it's going to have better deductions than a brand new project home will.
I'm a little bit confused about this point, because when you are explaining depreciation, the first bucket, you were saying like, if you didn't buy brand new, you can't really claim, all the things inside. Yeah. So how come if you, for example, if you buy a house, secondhand house, but it had renovated kitchen and bathroom by the previous owner, how come you can claim on that?
That's a good question. Because in a kitchen and a bathroom renovation, it's a mix. Some of it's Division 40, which you can't claim. Some of it's Division 43. And it's different between a kitchen and a bathroom. So if you're spending, say, $50,000 on a bathroom renovation, you'd probably find that $48,000 would likely be Division 43, so you get 2.5% of it. If you're spending $50,000 on a kitchen renovation, it's probably only $35,000 or $40,000 of Division 43. So if we think about a kitchen, the plant and equipment items that could possibly be in a kitchen are things like either a stove or a cooktop and an oven. There's likely to be a range hood. There might be an exhaust fan or a smoke alarm. Those are plant and equipment items. Whereas in a bathroom, the only things you can really claim are the exhaust fans or the IXL heat light and exhaust fan, the integrated system, heated towel rails and spa bath pumps. Like that's really the majority of it. So if you think about taking out, I mean, most bathrooms aren't necessarily going to have a heated towel rail and a spa bath pump. So there could only be, say, $600 worth of plant and equipment items that were installed in this property, and the rest of it is the structure. So that's what you're able to claim. So there's still the vast majority of the value would be in the structural deductions.
Interesting. I just got a Facebook user ask a question.
Great.
For Division 43, if it is a property that was living in, but then switched to investment later on, would it be still tax deductible, assuming it is a brand new property?
Yeah, so if it's, with Division 43, that does make sense. It's different for Division 40 and a Division 43. So let's say the investor buys a brand new property, they live in it for 6 months, and then they rent it out. The report would start from when they purchased the property, right? But for the first 6 months, there's going to be no depreciation deductions because it's not available for rent. It's their place of residence. So you can't claim deductions on your residence unless perhaps your house is owned by a company entity and you're renting it off the company and there's a weird setup, right? But assuming there's just a normal purchase, the report starts from day one, but the first 6 months, there'll be zero depreciation. From that point in time, they will be able to claim the Division 43 or the building structure deductions from 6 months onward. But the plant and equipment items, by the time that the tenant moves in, they'll be considered previously used. So there'll be no plant and equipment items. But I know the question was more about Division 43. What happens is that our report will always start from when you purchase the property, but what it will say is the date available for rent, and that normally is in the middle of a financial year. So what we do is we pro rata it. So we'll say, okay, there's 365 and a quarter days in this financial year. They moved out of the property and it became available for rent in May. So there's 60 of the 365 days left in that year. And then every year thereafter, they get the full amount.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Of course. And yeah, please, rather than presenting at you, I'm happy to answer any questions. This next slide, I put together, I read a quote from Albert Einstein that said, if you can't explain anything simply enough, then you probably don't understand it yourself. Not comparing myself to Einstein at all. He had way better hair and was a genius. I'm just a simple quantity surveyor, but I'm aware that, you know, it can get a bit confusing. It's a pretty dry topic. So I tried to come up with the 3 triggers that would tell you whether it's worth getting a depreciation schedule on either a property that you own or a property that you're looking to purchase. And it really does kind of summarize what we've talked about already. The 3 triggers are if the property was purchased brand new. We know that that's going to work because we know that the structure will qualify and we know that the plant and equipment items will qualify. So if you build or buy a brand new 3 or 4 bedroom home, you know, you might get $12,000 or $14,000 worth of deductions in the first year alone. So absolutely worthwhile paying for a report. The second one is all about the Division 43. So was it built after the 16th September 1987? Now, even if the property was built in 1988 for $100,000, right? Because it was a lot cheaper to build then, at 2.5% of that, you're getting $2,500 a year worth of deductions. And we would say that that's absolutely worthwhile to get a report. We normally like to see double our fee worth of deductions in the first financial year. That's about sort of the break-even point. We want the report to pay for itself within 1 year, even though there's 39 extra years in the report.
Yes.
The last point is it doesn't match 1 or 2. It's not brand new. It's not built after 1987. But what we're looking at is improvements or renovations. It could be done by you, the owner, or it could be done by the previous owner. But we're looking for $40,000 or $50,000 or more. Why $40,000? Well, $40,000 at 2.5% is $1,000 a year worth of deductions. That's, you know, in and around double our fee. That's probably the break-even point where we would recommend getting a report done. Now, $40,000 used to get you maybe a kitchen and a bathroom. These days, it'll probably get a plumber to come out and give you a quote. It doesn't go very far, right? And you don't have to be a building expert to be able to go and see, okay, that looks like it's had X amount spent. If you're looking at a property and it's been completely renovated, it's going to have cost more than $40,000. So that's probably the simplest way for me to sort of highlight when it's worthwhile getting a tax depreciation schedule. But even if you ignore that, you forget it, you're confused, we'll always offer free advice. So you can send an email, you could message me on Facebook or whatever and say, this is the property address. Do you think it's worthwhile getting a report? Can you give me an idea about the deductions? And we always do that free of charge.
Great. I just got 2 questions. One is, for example, if you bought a second-hand property and then you couldn't find out what was the original building cost for this property. So again, in that scenario, can you guys help to estimate what was the original building cost?
We almost never get original building costs. We might get an application put to a council for a new dwelling at X amount of price, but we never use that figure because those figures always tend to be underestimated because a lot of councils will say, okay, well, your development application fees are a percentage of the value. So councils have changed the way they operate now. Often they'll need a quantity surveyor to sign off on improvements to a property because they might, you know, someone might add an extra level to the property and someone at council will say, oh, how much is that going to cost? And they might say, $10,000. They go, oh, well, your fee's $200, right? But we're qualified to estimate construction costs, and the tax office says there's no obligation to chase down the tax affairs of the previous owner or the costs of the previous owner. So it's very, very rare for us to be given costs, and we're qualified to estimate them. I mean, that's our special skill.
So that logic would work against like the earlier exception you said. If the previous owner has done major bathroom or kitchen renovation, obviously myself as the new owner cannot obtain those receipts, then ATO wouldn't have issue in that, and you guys can actually help us estimate, and they don't have issue with that, correct?
Yeah, we're recognised as professional construction cost estimators. So if the ATO, let's say worst case scenario, you go through an audit process, the ATO sees some Division 43 deductions on the property, they'll see that there's a depreciation schedule in the mix, and then that's normally the end of it. Because if you think about if they're trying to dispute that, they're going to need an expert witness in the quantity surveying space to be able to sort of challenge our report. And it's up to us to stand by the costs. So the consumer doesn't have to worry about it. Our professional indemnity and our industry regulators and our experience is what enables us to put those reports together. So, yeah, absolutely, the ATO will accept us.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. This is very exciting. I'm learning so much.
That's good. That's good. I'm glad. So in the beginning, I shared an example about if you're on $100,000 and you get $11,000 worth of deductions, how do the deductions kind of work? The average deductions that we see are normally a little bit less than $11,000, but it's not a million miles away. So I've got some deductions analysis for the last financial year. So our average figure was $8,459 across every residential depreciation schedule that we did in that financial year. The average deductions on the life of the property was $214,000. And here you can see house versus unit versus townhouse. What the total deductions are, and then granny flats in there as well. Obviously, we had some good deductions there on the granny flats. The difference between a granny flat and a house is they're normally granny flats will be newer. So if we're doing a depreciation schedule on a granny flat, typically it would be a lot newer than the house. That's probably why granny flat costs are closer to the house, where we see a lot of older established houses, and then we've got duplexes in the mix there as well. I referenced before when Scott Morrison made the statement about the plant and equipment items not being claimable unless you buy brand new or put in a brand new asset. So I raced in to work. I crunched the numbers. I sent that to Louis Christopher and Pete Wargent, who I knew were being interviewed the next morning by a journalist, and just made sure we got that information out there. So what we actually found is that the majority of properties that we do were built after 1987. At the time, it was about 69%. So I guess from my perspective, I had a lot of clients ringing me saying, how will this impact me? What will this mean for the future? What will it mean for my future portfolio? I answered those questions as kindly and as gracefully as I could, but at the same time, I'm trying to work out whether we still have a tax depreciation business or not. So it was a little bit of a stressful time. But we found, we made it. We found that 69% of properties were built after 1987. So that meant that 70% of our business still existed, right? There was still value in those reports. And what we found is that of the ones that were built prior to 1987, 63.8% of them had been extensively renovated with an average value of $39,191. Now, this is back in 2017. Construction costs were very, very different in 2017 to what they are today. I mean, what they are today is very different to what they were pre-COVID. And so what we found is that I think it was 83.4% of the last 1,000 residential reports we did, we would still recommend the owner proceed on the basis of it being worthwhile deductions. So certainly it did take away a certain percentage of properties that we would have recommended a report in the past, but we wouldn't again. You know, it was obviously over 10%. But for anyone that sort of says, oh, the legislation changes, you know, depreciation's not worthwhile anymore, this kind of flies in the face of that. I mentioned before as well, just under a quarter of investors live in their property prior to renting it out. That's a stat that we're checking every year, and it normally falls between 22 and 25. Why I think that's interesting, apart from it being much higher than what I expected it was going to be, it sort of says to me that some investors were actually created as accidental investors. So if they lived in it and then turned it into a rental property, perhaps that wasn't part of the plan. They might have look to upgrade their property, and then the bank or the broker said, you know, you don't actually have to sell this property, and they think, oh, great, well, we can keep that as an investment. So the level of sophistication in and around investing, especially things like tax depreciation, perhaps is not there. They might not have been strategic investors. It might just been an accidental thing. So that's why we think it's important to share our message about tax depreciation, because those people could be missing out on deductions. And that's the figure that I put down the bottom. So that was another research project that we undertook that got some national media for us a few years ago. We looked at 1,000 residential purchases, and we worked out that there were 6.7% of those investors that would miss out on deductions. Now, to put that in context, the ATO allows you to back claim 2 financial years worth of deductions. So that's good news for anyone potentially listening that hasn't had a depreciation schedule done on their property. You can actually, with your accountant, go and amend previous year's returns and recoup those deductions. But when we talk about that 6.7% of people, those were people that waited more than 2 years to get in touch with us. And we calculated the average amount that they lost per investor was $20,537. Now, if you extrapolate that across the property investor base at that time, it equated to $2.88 billion worth of unclaimed depreciation deductions. So that figure kind of keeps me up nights, right? That's why I'm here, to make sure that people aren't leaving that money on the table. That's a very, very significant amount, and something that we're working hard to try and change.
Yes, interesting.
I've got some case studies here, and people like me like to typically put, you know, really pretty properties with really high deductions because it makes it look fantastic, and we can see how much value we can add. I've gone a different way. I've taken some very basic property investment purchases, because these are the real world average properties that property investors tend to purchase. Yes, there are people that, you know, purchase $20 million commercial properties or $10 million residential places and put them on Airbnb or whatever. But the average amount people spend is around $700,000 on an investment property, according to our data. So typically it's things that look a bit more like this. So this was a house in Queensland. It was actually built prior to 1987, so no original depreciation deductions, but we calculated $74,000 worth of prior improvements. So the previous owner did a kitchen, bathroom, carport, driveway, those sorts of things. The client also added just over $10,000 worth of works in and around their purchase as well. So this property saw $3,000 worth of deductions in the first full financial year, and total deductions at $54,000. So this is one of the pretty typical properties that we would see. Now, the average deductions are closer to $9,000, so this is on the lower side, but still a great result for the client to be able to claim that $3,000 in the first year and to continue to claim deductions year after year.
Yes, agree.
What do you reckon, Lillian? You buy that one?
I'm thinking I got 2 houses that I never, looked into depreciation. So after tonight's talk,
dear.
contacting you. Yeah, but that means I can only back claim the last 2 years, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. No, we'll have a look at that for you and put a free estimate together. And it might be the case that there's nothing in there, and we'll always say, look, it doesn't stack. We can't, in good faith, recommend you pay us money to give you something that doesn't work for you. But most of the time we find something. So happy to look at that for you. Now I've got. What's happened here? My slides have broken. Oh, here we go. We'll get back. There we go. Oh, okay. That one's, it's not wanting to let me move on to the next one, but so I'll just double click on that. You can see that, hopefully.
Yes.
So this is a property in Tasmania, and it was a brand new built. So no prior improvements because it didn't exist prior to this owner purchasing it, and they didn't make any renovations or improvements. Obviously brand new, they're not going to renovate it, but sometimes clients will add some blinds or a split system or something like that. It had a relatively low total construction cost. It was a pretty small property, $214,000, but $10,632.55. I love my decimal places in the first year of deductions. So that's probably on the lower side of a brand new home from a deductions point of view, but obviously a great candidate for deductions. Just in case there are any people playing at home in the commercial space, here's a fairly typical, relatively cheap commercial property in Townsville. So it was a warehouse that was built prior to 1982. The cutoff date for warehouses is not 87, it's actually 82. But the previous owner had spent nearly $200,000 on a fit out, some roofing, a mezzanine level, and the client put in a roller door and a kitchenette as well. So the total deductions on this one were $135,000 in total and $10,000 in the first year. Now, it might be a little bit difficult to see that picture, but from the outside, it doesn't look terribly special. You might drive past that thinking, well, there's not going to be any deductions in that. But you can almost see the roller door looks brand new there. It's had a coat of paint. Those things make a difference. The awning at the front, you can see, is unlikely to be original. And of course, they had some fit out stuff in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just because tax depreciation in and of itself can be a little bit boring, although it does save you money and could potentially save you some money, Lillian, I thought I would share some of the research stuff that we produce on the regular. And it gives us insights into what investors are doing, what investors are buying. So as you can imagine, doing thousands and thousands of depreciation schedules a year, we get some pretty good insights into where people are purchasing, whether they're buying houses versus units, how much they're paying, and those sorts of things.
Yes.
So what we've really noticed is that investors are buying a lot less new property. So new property purchases for us were almost half of all investment properties in 2019, and that's actually come all the way back to 16.24% in 2022, and it's now back up at just under a third of all properties purchased are brand new. We can talk about the merits of buying brand new or established, but that's just what the data is showing me. Houses have become much more popular than units. So houses are 63.5% of all purchases, and units are at 18%. Very, very low compared to some of the data sets that we've had over previous years. So down 40% in the last 2 years. And there is a number of reasons for that. I think units really suffered during COVID because we didn't have international students, we didn't have overseas migration. There's also been some bad press about cladding and building issues and people being evicted, the Opal Towers and things like that. So investors have been avoiding units to some degree. I mentioned before, on average, how much investors are paying. So in the last financial year, it was just over $700,000. And you can see houses at 700, units at 758, and townhouses at 631. So I don't know if you're anything like me, Lillian, but I find this sort of stuff quite interesting to analyze what people are up to.
Yes, but my math is nowhere near as good as you, so probably not as fascinating for me as you.
Hey, I cheat. I do a lot of work on Excel. This one you might find very interesting. We've been crunching data on which states are most favoured by property investors. We shared some data in and around the legislation changes on land tax in Queensland, which were repealed, but had 98 days where they were actually legislated. We saw a drop happening in Queensland. But the biggest thing that we've noticed is we compared Q1 last year to Q1 this year. So January to March 2022 to January to March 2023. And the big thing that we noticed is that WA has become a massive hotspot for property investors. So last year we had 9.38% of all property investors in our data buying in WA, and that's skyrocketed to 31.86%, so up 22%. So much so that it's actually stolen from every state except ACT. So the prevalence of purchases in every state has gone down as WA has become so popular. So it's second now only to Queensland as the most popular state for property investors.
Yes, agree.
Now, how far do property investors live from where they buy their investment property? This is the first time anyone had ever shared this data, as far as I'm aware. We shared that in 2019, pre-pandemic, and we found that it was 293 kilometres. We thought that was quite a distance because the old adage is, or it's not an adage, but the sort of conventional wisdom is that property investors weren't terribly sophisticated and they would buy around the corner from where they live because they want to be able to drive past it or they know the local area fairly well. So that was very interesting to see that it was 293 kilometres. Now, during the pandemic, that almost doubled to 559 kilometres, and we've just released the recent data. In fact, the 857 kilometres, John McGrath, who's the head of McGrath Real Estate, actually quoted in the media just 2 days ago. I should have sent him the updated figures. It's doubled again pretty much. So because of the rise of Perth as a property investment destination, as you can imagine, the distance between the eastern seaboard, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane to Perth is, I don't even know how far it is, 3,500, something like that. That's really, really blown out the numbers. So what can we learn from that? I think we can learn that property investors are now looking at the whole of Australia rather than their backyard. They're prepared to research the property. There are so many more online tools available, and the prevalence of buyer's agents has really helped people to have confidence to buy a million miles from where they actually live. So I thought that was a very interesting one to share.
Plus, I think we're running out of affordable suburbs to buy in Australia. So people have to go further and further away now to find affordable suburbs.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I recorded a podcast. I'm a co-host of a property podcast called The Property Trio. We recorded a special episode on Perth, which will be coming up soon. There was actually a time where Perth it had the highest median house prices of any capital city in Australia. It seems crazy to think about it, but it was higher even than Sydney. Now, at the moment, Perth is the second cheapest capital city after Darwin. Now, a lot of property investors will just blanket avoid Darwin because it's such a volatile property market with exposure to, liquefied liquefied natural gas, LNG, and things like that. So if for people that have only got, say, $400, $500, $600, or on the average $700,000 to spend, that can get you some good quality property in places like Perth. So yeah, I think affordability absolutely has been driving the success of that market for sure. What else have I got here? Missed deductions. So I shared those figures a little while ago. we found 6.7% had missed deductions, and we've actually just crunched the numbers on that again recently. 6 years ago, it took 691 days from settlement, say the purchase of a property, to get in touch with us. This year, it's 184 days. So people are much more onto it. And as a result, the figures are now showing that only 4.53% of investors miss out on deductions, and the average, instead of it being 20,537, it's now only just over $7,000. So we've dropped that figure from 2.88 billion to 722 million, but I won't stop until it's zero. 722 is still too much.
That's all the business you missed.
Yeah, exactly. And here I am just trying to give people free money that they're entitled to. You know, sometimes people have sort of said to me, oh, yeah, but, you know, you're denying the government of tax revenue. And, well, I suppose in essence we are, but if you want to give money away, I think that you're better off giving it to a charity than a government. Doesn't really matter whether you're Labor, Liberal, Greens, Teal, whatever. Governments tend to mismanage money fairly well, and the money is probably better managed by a charity. They need it more than the government does. So I encourage everyone to claim their entitlements. As a thank you to anyone that's come along to listen to me prattle on, we're offering a reduced fee, of course, through yourself, Lillian. So our standard fee for residential property is $650 plus GST. But if you mention this presentation, we're happy to look after you for $600 plus GST. And that's only when we know that there's going to be significant deductions in your property. So we won't charge you for a report if it's not going to be beneficial for you. And we work across Australia. So that is the end of my formal presentation. So hopefully that wasn't too painful. Hopefully everybody learned something. And if you've got any questions or comments, yeah, now's the time to ping them through.
Perfect. Yeah, Mike, I'm very curious. Would you mind sharing your own what your own property portfolio is like, and your property investment insight, from doing that over the years?
Yeah, so I suppose in many respects, there's many more successful property investors than myself. I'm probably a better business person than I am a property investor. It's a bit like the mechanic's wife's car that's always breaking down. You know, I should be more onto it, but business just takes up so much time. My wife and I sort of made a decision a long time ago not to sort of share publicly information about the size of our property and the number of properties and those sorts of things. But I can give you some insights into the types of properties that we like to purchase, and I think in some respects the number of properties is the wrong question as well, because you can say, all right, well, I own 10 properties and they're all worth $150,000 each and none of them grow, or you could own one property that's worth $2.5 million in a blue chip suburb of Sydney that you bought 10 years ago. It's horses for courses, and the number of properties is not the most important metric. But my first investment was really my principal place of residence. I bought a property that would have been in the mid to late 2000s. And because I was a quantity surveyor and I understood deductions, and I'm almost trained as a valuer. I almost became a valuer. I actually bought a 2-bedroom property that had 2 living spaces and relatively cheaply turned that into a 3-bedroom property. So I always look for those instant kind of uplift opportunities. So not necessarily buying just to renovate, but buying to renovate or improve that forces a valuer to look differently at a property. So if a valuer came to that property when I just bought it, it was a 2-bedroom property. If they came back 6 months later, it was a 3-bedroom property. Now, why does that matter? Well, it forces them to use comparable sales for 3-bedroom properties rather than 2-bedroom properties. So I also rented out the front room to a flatmate, so I actually claimed deductions based on a percentage of the floor area. Now that, of course, exposed me to some capital gains tax that I had to pay when I did unfortunately sell that property. It's actually for sale again right now, and I sort of want to buy it back, but it's more of a nostalgic thing than a business thing. So I'm trying to, remain unemotional. But yeah, that was something that I did really well at. My personal philosophy is I'm a big believer in land to asset ratio, so I'll always prefer to buy a house over a unit. Now, there are certain pockets within Australia where houses are just far too expensive. If you have $2 million to buy your first investment property, I'd be more inclined to say buy 3 or 4 of them and buy in different markets so you can kind of diversify that. I think a lot of the capital growth drivers and the momentum comes from that lower end of the market as well. So obviously you don't want to be buying as cheap as possible, because that can impact the type of tenant that you get and the type of owner-occupier that might want to buy that. But I always like to buy houses rather than units. I do own some townhouses. I don't own any units per se, but I do own townhouses, and ideally those are ones that do have a big land to asset ratio. But yeah, if you can get into a townhouse in some of those locations, then that's beneficial. I'm not a big believer in population growth as a driver for property prices. I'm a big believer in looking at the supply-demand fundamentals and the demographics of the area as well. I think that's really critical to purchase properties that aren't just having appeal to a renter. So why would you buy an investment property that appeals or could appeal to owner-occupiers? Well, whether you're going to sell it or not, you want to consider that asset as something that could be for sale, right? Because if a valuer looks at that property and they say, look, that's really just investor style stock, that limits the amount of potential purchases. So that limits the value. But if you're buying properties that also appeal to investors and owner-occupiers, the owner-occupiers are roughly 70% of the market. So that's a big consideration for me. I don't own any properties in WA as yet. I've always been a little bit sceptical about the reliance of that state on the resource sector, which is over 30%. And at the moment, I'm worried about the heat of the market and people buying at the top of that market. It was a great place to buy 18 months ago. But there was also a period of about, I think it was 16 years, where the property price, the median house price in Perth actually did nothing. So it's very famous for having big swings and being flat for a long time. So I like to look at markets where there is sort of a constant indicator of growth. Now, prior performance is no guarantee of future performance, but I like to see those suburbs that are perennially valuable. So I've shared a lot of insights there, Lillian. Does that sort of cover that off fairly well?
Yes, I'm surprised you are still a bit unsure about Perth, given that you also showed those statistics where, but interesting. Can I ask, because you being a depreciation expert, what's your opinion about investing in brand new properties? Are you do you support it, or your preference is more secondhand properties? I just curious.
My preference is always established property. Now, that's not to say that you can't make money with brand new property, but you do need to consider the margins that are built into those properties, and you also need to consider the supply. And the supply is sort of more what it's about. Like I've had people say to me before, oh, you know, Mike, you hate units, you hate brand new property. I say, well, no, it's not that at all. It's just that when I think about units, I worry about supply. So my head immediately goes to that big block with 300 units in it. Because the trouble is, if you're an investor in that block, you might be competing against 10 or 15 other landlords trying to rent that unit. And if they're all the same, you've got no scarcity value.
Yes.
Whereas there are established blocks, or let's say even brand new boutique style blocks. And I think where some of the opportunity is in the downsizers who are looking for 3-bedroom apartments, or they're looking for something with a higher standard of finish. I much prefer those style properties than, say, the 1-bedroom apartments. And the historical performance of houses versus units, units have sort of narrowed the gap a little bit, but it's from a low base, and houses have traditionally always performed better.
Yes.
Why an established house versus a new house? Well, a new house is not necessarily a bad thing. It's certainly better for depreciation, but new houses, it depends where it is. If it's in a new housing development, then the worry for me is the supply. So there could be another 300 houses built there. And so
Yes.
what that's going to do is that's going to change the balance of demand versus supply. So it's going to put downward pressure on your property. Whereas if it's, say, a property that's been demolished in an established suburb where there's no extra land, then people will pay a premium for a brand new property in that established location, and there's nothing else that can kind of be built to compete with that, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. I once spoke to an investor. He say he only invests in brand new property, like house and land, not apartments, house and land. And he say he will only keep buying new ones. And as the earlier ones that he bought becomes older and the depreciation benefits reduce and all that, he keeps buying new ones to help pay off those older ones. So that's the sort of strategy that he uses. Do you see much benefit in that? I just want to ask you.
Yeah, look, I don't. If someone strikes upon a strategy that's working for them, then all power to them. I'm not sort of an all-knowing, omnipotent person that knows everything about property investing. My concern with that is just about, okay, well, where is that new property located? Is it in a development, or is it on the outskirts of the city where land that's perhaps regional or farming land could be rezoned into residential property? Those are kind of the risks with new property if it's in that area. From a depreciation point of view, people sort of, because it's my bread and butter, right? I've been doing depreciation for a long, long time. People will say to me, oh, what's the best type of property to buy for depreciation deductions? And I normally horrify them with an answer that kind of sounds like the worst investment property ever. It would be an apartment in a massive complex with a gym, a swimming pool, a cinema, 8 levels of basement, 6 lifts. The reason why is because when you own a property in a complex like that, if it's strata titled, and something like that definitely would be, you actually own a percentage of the lifts, a percentage of the gyms, a percentage of the basement. Now, what will actually happen is that your strata fees will be astronomical, but the deductions will be fantastic. So I've done reports on properties in Melbourne that have had 6 lifts and they were all worth $1 million each. So this person in a block of 300 would have 1/300th claim roughly of $6 million worth of lifts. So the deductions can be absolutely astronomical. But depreciation to me is a bonus. It's not a strategy. What you need to weigh up is, okay, let's look at a brand new property. Let's look at what potentially it could grow at per year. Now, if it grows at 4% per year in capital growth, that might be great. And then you get, let's say, $4,000 a year back in your pocket on deductions. Whereas we've got an established property that might grow at 7% per year and perhaps give you $0 in depreciation deductions. If you plug those numbers into a spreadsheet, you'll quickly see that capital growth is way more valuable to an investor from a long-term strategy point of view than those deductions are. So I'm always sort of wary of people trying to avoid paying the tax and purchasing an asset to lower their tax. The end goal for most investors is they want to grow an asset base. They want to be able to retire on a certain income, or they want to get to retirement age with a certain value nest egg. Now, of course, we've got to get properties that are balanced from a cash flow point of view. We don't want to be chipping into our pocket too much. We don't want to be we don't want to be in a position where the bank won't lend us any more money because we're too negatively geared. But the performance of the asset is way more important than the bonus of the depreciation, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think you have hit the nail on the head by saying, depreciation is more like a additional benefit rather than just using that as the main strategy. Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you very much, Mike.
Of course.
Well, thank you so much for coming to our group tonight. I think we learned heaps from you. Yeah, so it's been excellent to have you.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. And if you want to get in touch, I'm easy to find. You can check out our website. You can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. Always happy to help with any questions, and happy investing to everyone. And I hope you got some value.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And there's a few members also say thank you on the side. Yeah, you mentioned you couldn't see the comments, so I just let you know.
No, I can't see the comments, so I apologize for not responding directly. But thank you for any positive feedback I got in the comments.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, so if any member are interested or need depreciation, yeah, please look up Mike. He's easy to find everywhere, so not a problem. Yeah, he can definitely help. You have already helped a few of my clients with depreciation too, so very helpful. Yeah, I usually contact Aiden. Yeah, and then
yes, he's a great guy. Yep.
Yeah, very quick feedback about this property, how much it can potentially depreciate every year. So it's been very helpful. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we very much appreciate the opportunity to work with the clients, and it's great to work with people like you who are educating people on the potential deductions on a property, and hopefully everyone that's listened today will be able to go and share that message, and we'll get that $700 odd million of missed deductions down a bit lower.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Better let you rest now. Yeah, thank you for all the talks.
Thanks a lot. See you later.
Okay. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.